So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to paint these kind of mini watercolor galaxy bookmarks in Procreate. As usual, I'll list the brushes I'm using in the description. So in my kind of experience with painting galaxies, I think it's easier to kind of get the textures worked out first and then do the colors later on. So I'm basically going to start by laying down a background wash that's just in one color. So for that, I'm going to use the blooming wash brush and a pretty deep saturated indigo color. And I'll just kind of scribble all over my canvas and try to create a really interesting kind of cloudy texture. And it's definitely up to you, but I usually like to have a sort of lighter area kind of in the middle, and then towards the edges, it's going to be a bit darker. And there we go. I think this texture looks pretty good. And you can see it almost fills up my entire artboard. Obviously, this is way too big, but I like to cut it down later on. Next, I'm going to move on and kind of show you how I do the colors. So the colors are going to be on a separate layer above this galaxy. And if I tap on this layer, it brings up the menu here, and I'm going to set it to clipping mask. And what this does is it lets me sort of paint on other colors, and they won't interfere with the transparency. It'll just sort of colorize everything that's below it. So I'm going to use the same blooming wash brush and a couple different kind of galaxy colors and do my best to colorize this. And then for me, just through kind of experimentation, I realized I really like to add some yellow in there as well. And once I'm happy with how the colors pretty much look, I'll go ahead and merge those together with the galaxy, just so everything is on this one layer, and then I can move on and do some blending. And that's going to be up to you, but I'm just going to play around with a few different water blenders and see if I can create some nice smooth areas in this galaxy. And there we go. I think this blending looks really good. Now we could move on and add stars and stuff, but I want to show you kind of two optional tricks to improve the colors. The first thing I want to do is kind of boost the contrast. So to do that, I'm going to go to my curves adjustment. I'll make sure it's set to gamma, and I'm just going to give it a sort of S-curve shape like this. This does boost the saturation a little bit, but we can fix it later. And I think I'll set it just like that. And since the saturation is a little bit too much, I'm going to reduce it with the hue, saturation, and brightness. The next optional adjustment is to use the color balance. And I recommend doing that very selectively. So for example, I'm going to use the freehand selection tool, and I'll just create a pretty random selection like this. I'll circle back, and I'll feather it out maybe around 30%. This is quite a bit. After that, I'll go to my color balance, and I'm going to tap on the sun and make sure it's set to mid-tone. And I'm going to play around with these kind of settings down here until I find some interesting color variations. And once again, if these adjustments boost the saturation too much, you can always go back to the hue, saturation, and brightness and reduce that. And at this point, with the colors and blending finished, we can move on and actually start cutting this into the final shape. And actually, I have a kind of a funny trick for that. So basically, everything so far is on this one layer, and I'm just going to use the arrow tool to move it off the edge. Then I'll go out of the arrow tool and then move it off the other edge, and I'll basically just cut it into shape this way. And the final bookmark I want to make is going to be a little bit narrower. So I'm just going to use the freeform adjustment here and kind of shrink it. Now, when we cut it into shape this way, it makes an edge here that's way too perfect. Now, depending on what you want to do with the final result, that may not matter. But if you want to rough this up and give it a natural edge, that's really easy. Just go to the adjustments, liquefy, set it to crystals, and you can copy my settings here. And I'm just going to carefully go along the edge, and you can see it sort of kind of roughens it up a little bit. There we go. It's a pretty subtle thing, but it does make a big difference, especially when we print this out. And I think I'll go ahead and do this effect to the remaining edges. And finally, at this point, we can add the stars. And those are going to be on a separate layer above the galaxy. For the color, I'll choose pure white. And you could paint the stars on any number of ways. You could even just use the fine liner pen and dot them on manually. But I want to use one of the drips and splatters brushes. I think I'll use number 4. Now, this is a brush that I sell on my Etsy store, but you can download this specific one for free in the description. And this looks pretty good, but you can see this particular brush has a lot of transparency. So to reduce that, I'm just going to duplicate the star layer. And then every time I add an additional copy, it gets a little bit more opaque. I think in this case, 3 is enough, so I'll merge those together. And of course, at this point, if this is basically all you want for your galaxy, it could be finished. But I want to show you how to paint 2 kind of simple details that'll really make this more interesting. So the first thing is sort of a glowing planet or a glowing moon. And I think I'll paint it up here. So for that, I'll make a separate layer kind of above everything. For the brush, I'll go back to the watercolor brushes and use the fine liner pen. And I'll just scribble out a thing like this. Then I'll go to Gaussian blur and I'll blur it out. And then I'll adjust the opacity to make it so it's just like slightly lighter than the background. There we go. After that, I'll make a layer above it. And then within that glow, I'll use the colored pencil brush to kind of scribble out a planet. And the reason I'm changing the colors so frequently is because I want to create a very subtle sense of detail on the surface. If I just use one color, I think it'd be too consistent. And then lastly, to make this planet stand out a bit more, I'm going to mess with the saturation and the brightness. And I wasn't too happy with the position of this planet, so I went ahead and adjusted it. And finally, the second thing I wanted to show you is how to paint a sort of sparkling star. So once again, I'll make another blank layer. And I'll choose a very light kind of yellowish white. For the brush, I'll use the Shoto brush. And I'm going to paint these oversized. I'm just going to paint these kind of cross shapes like this, that taper. And then in the middle where they crisscross, I'll just round them out like this. There we go. And then after that, I can just use the arrow tool to kind of scale this to the correct size. And then I can duplicate it in the layers panel and create as many sparkling stars as I want. You can use the distort option as well if you want to make them look more different. And just like that, this simple galaxy is finished. And here's the final result, printed out using my Canon Pixma. Now, to make the colors a little bit more kind of boosted when I print it, I did spray these with lacquer. Now, if you use the special printer paper, you may not need to do this, but I just printed these out on watercolor paper, and I personally find that the lacquer really boosts the colors. And that pretty much wraps it up. If you made it to the end, let me know in the comments. If you think I've earned it, give this video a like. And if you want to learn about printing your Procreate artwork on a Canon Pixma, I recommend watching this video next.